Well, I wanted to start with a word of gratitude for everyone, given it's the holidays, but also that Wes, you were saying earlier about when we started this journey, this looked overwhelming journey, and then here we are, pretty much almost at the last session, almost the last session, one more session of graduations and marketing your practice. But gratitude for everyone of being engaged, showing up, putting the time, the investment, and for all the master coaches that have guided us throughout the design and the executions and everyone's feedback on this. And so I just feel a level of gratitude for everyone just got us to this point. So thank you for being through with us on this journey, and look forward to seeing all of you in January. And so I just wanted to start with that level of gratitude for everyone. Every, um, anyone want to share uh, their reflection on how we, getting here before we launch into the closing of the journey, and how do we close an engagement? Just giving space for people to chime in.
Well, Mo, I'll share this, and I think I put in a couple of emails thanking people. This is not about me. But last month, I had what I'll call the trifecta. The three coachees I'm working with all said that I was the favorite hour of their month. And again, my reflection on the coaches that I've had, Mo was one, I think, in 2014, and then I had another. And my reflection, I mean, I can't remember a ton about that, but I do remember it was always the favorite hour of my month. And despite my failures, flops, the sleepless nights, like, why did I ask that stupid question? It's just to be present and sit there and hear these people that I respected really start to say, I'm looking forward to our hour together. It was just a reminder of when I look at the 8, 9 books next to my workstation that we read this last year, it's just a reminder of just how wonderful this has been.
Thank you, Ryan. Much gratitude. Danny, any thoughts? You're unmuted.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I've found that the learning from peers and coaches, it's been a different kind of learning than even some of the other kinds of similar experiences. I think there's a robust body of knowledge, but there's also an understanding that there are different styles and different approaches with different coaches, different clients, and I just feel so privileged to have had exposure to see those different styles. It's yeah, great deal of gratitude here.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Let's start with the session. And I wanted to start with this one as a conversation is because that's literally how even the journey with coaching, when you have an engagement going, you get to a level where, couple session before the end of the formal engagement, it's the conversation of reflection and really trying to understand where your client is and what's the right move next as far as continuing versus transitioning and ending the engagement. So all this conversation start into really just taking time to reflect on that. So today is really about some of that discussion of how do you, after journeying with someone for many months, how do you really connect with them around that. So let me share my screen. And I don't think you see my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, does that work? That works. All right. So today we want to talk about two things. One is, as we're still into the loop of the conversation, one aspect we did not get to spend time on is how do you bring more self-awareness to the client through 360 assessment? And so how does a 360 work? How do we launch it, debrief it, whether you do it electronically or not electronically? What are the questions to ask if you're the one who's doing the interviewing? So this stakeholder centered coaching is what we will be talking about. And we sent as a pre-work a video and a paper by my friend Marshall Goldsmith. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then how do we close a relationship or extend it? And so we'll be talking through that, and then just setting it up for next session. The next session, there will be some also didactic, not just graduation, and you'll have a homework to reflect on between now and then that I will go through by the end of the session. If anyone is dropping out early, you will be sending it via email, but basically you're going to be developing your own coaching profile. Like if I'm going to hire you, how do I understand who you are? What's different about you as a coach? What's your philosophy? All of those things. And so it's your marketing basically of yourself as a coach, whether you're internal or external, but it's being able to put all of this together, right? And so next session is about that. How do you position yourself? How do you differentiate yourself? How do you create a uniqueness to your approach? In working and through that, and so we call it designing of the offer. But just know that that assignment, it's going to take some reflection on this. This is not a let me whip something together. It's going to take some time for you to really think through who are you, what is different about your style and coaching, and having coached some people throughout this journey. Hopefully that gave you a little bit more of understanding yourself and your uniqueness as a coach, and we can talk through that. So the objective today is really to talk about those aspects, the feedback. How do you develop feedback? How do you debrief a feedback that's going to be difficult, right? If we get a 360 feedback on someone that is all glorious and positive, that's easy. It becomes more of a celebration and confirmation. But what happened when it's not? And you're going to disorient your client with this new set of data. So how do we break that information? How do we connect through that? And then we'll talk through how do you close an engagement and kind of get to a reflection, and we'll use some examples of that. Okay. So for the pre-work, we sent a video with Marshall Goldsmith and an article about stakeholder-centered coaching, which is pretty much kind of how do you identify and kind of bring forward to someone the blind spots, the things that people know about them, but they don't know themselves, right? And so how do you bring that forward, but also how do you use input from others to develop your client, not necessarily just what the client says I want to work on, it's also what other people are telling them about that. So any reflection or takeaway or things that you have seen or you took away even from your conversation with your clients. And then I'll ask also the master coaches to kind of jump in based on their experience of working through this aspect of a stakeholder center coaching with 360 and other people feedback on this. So any thoughts or reflection on the reading the video and your own experiences?
Mo, I was particularly struck by the thought that if you are actually at a point in the relationship to give meaningful, maybe difficult feedback, that that your client might not like you as much. And so I was struck by the pay for performance and the behavior change, because if I say, you know, Mo, you really need to be less direct in your communication, you're going to walk away and say, she doesn't get me. I don't want to work with her. And so I thought that, which, you know, oh, that's great. Oh, you've had some tough interaction, you know. So the comment he said is that in fact, the method of just coaching for what the client wants without the outside observation might lead to not addressing the real issues that lead to progress. So I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition that said, yeah, you got to tackle some hard things if you're going to actually change behavior and move people forward. So,
yeah, very
I
good.
fe-
Go
oh,
ahead. Go ahead, go
I
ahead.
found it interesting. Not that I disagree that if there's integrity issues, that termination is, sometimes the right move. Probably most of the time is the right move. However, I did find it interesting that they don't coach, because after the fact, someone's lack of integrity, I guess it just feels like they might need a coach after that to get to a different place. And so I get that that's not what this group does, but I just, that made me kind of think a lot about, I don't know, just the opportunity that's there with someone who has had a big breach for their future.
Open for discussions, thoughts
Yeah,
on the two comments.
I tend to agree, Elizabeth, that the coaching after the event or after the firing for a performance issue can help the next employer get the best employee. And it sometimes the humility that it takes, that knock, is often what helps change the behavior. But in each one of these coaching relationships, it's about the trust that you're building to be able to challenge, and knowing your clients' values, that they want to show up in an authentic way. And after the first kind of resistance that I've generally had with folks that are in this situation and the deferring, it's really listened to that conversation about where they're externalizing and what would really make a difference today for them. But understanding also there's a gender bias here, right? So we have, sort of not the same assessment tool that how women show up and how men show up, and was considered assertiveness, right, for women in these situations. So remembering that we've got a systemic a piece here as well.
Mikhail?
Yeah, that was actually one of, and when you sent the case study, that was what rubbed me the most. I was kind of like, I need to know more about that team. And I can see that success, and it's actually something that came out in my own reflections, right? Success in a leadership role as a woman or somebody, whatever, is of a minority, as not part of the dominant culture, let's put it that way. You have to adapt to some degree, and having awareness how you're perceived by your team is really important. At the same time, I think having these conversations in a sensitive way and understanding how someone can show up authentically for the team without having to bend out of shape or violate their values, and bring the team along with recognizing that a woman who shows up assertive might exactly be that and not aggressive, and how to balance that. I think actually for me in my coaching journey, letting go of needing to know, being, having subject matter expertise was wonderful. And I love doing that more and more in conversations, but I also know that I'll have a different threshold where I will need to, add value to a conversation in a certain way, because as a woman you don't have a lot of credit in that jar, right? And that'll go down to zero and you'll be seen differently. I haven't figured that out yet, but I think that whole aspect of it is a really interesting space to step in, and I'd love to hear some of our mentor coaches here reflect on that. How do you walk someone through that, where you say, this is how your team perceives you, but I'm not telling you to smile more and just be more womanly, right? But do more of those things. Talk about your children. Oh, what about if you don't have children as a woman, right? And how does that reflect? You cannot just make them up. How do you navigate that space where somebody can then still be successful? Because I think that's, to me, that stood out in sort of what didn't get touched on in the materials we looked at.
Very good point. I'll go back to Galen's point about, as coaches, we have to be always curious that there's 50% other side of a story than what our clients are saying. Always, right? And when we're starting new relationship, we are so eager to want to help our client that we want to sympathize and say, oh, poor you, let me help you, and so on, versus, yes, I do want to help you, but also I do want to see who are the other players into the story. And so if they're playing the victim, or they're playing, whatever role they decided to play, right? That it's a play in a story. And our role as coaches is to always hold that there is another side, right? That U-shaped conversation is always like, yeah, you're here, but I'm sure there's something else, right? That clarity of conversation. And so, and I can tell you about a story after story of where the client were represented as one side of the thing, and then you go discover and talk to people, and it's like, oh my God, it's a whole new different thing, right? And then that's where integrity comes into play also, is like, look, don't BS me if there's that. Is it a self-awareness, or is it a people are mirroring something or trying to deflect something or so on? And so you get deeper into that. But this aspect of always being curious about what is the rest of the story. And if you look at the list of questions in the U-shaped coaching, there's a big question there that says, what else is in this? What is the other story? Who are the other players in the story? And so that we're always questioning, what else? Where's your team? So Michaela, back to your point is, all right, well, how is the person showing up? But also, where is the team? And at the executive level, when I coach someone at the executive level, it always ends up being a team coaching and not just the individual. It always evolves into a secondary team coaching, because this person they cannot just lead themselves. They have to lead a team. So there's other aspect into this, and it comes into the listening of, how do I get into that, and how do I get the rest of the story by talking to people about it. Thought, reflection. Laura, you've done a lot of coaching and you've seen all of this.
Yeah, I think it goes back to sometimes timing of when the 360 is done, and what kind of a relationship we have with that client. I mean,
Mhm.
it seems, and I think sometimes we don't have control over that, right? But I think if we're able to establish a really strong relationship and have been able to get at even some deeper things and then the 360, I have found in my own experience that then it's a different kind of experience reviewing the results and talking about it. If it's something that happens like almost like right away after like the first or second session, sometimes I think it can be a little bit more challenging. Because
Yeah.
that trust may not have been 100% built up yet.
So timing is an important element, and Margie is on the call here in the background. Hi, Margie. This whole design, or even when we run leadership program, right? We always struggle of where do we sync the 360 as we're building trust, right? Not doing a 360 at the beginning of the program before we even established the trust in the conversation makes it very hard, right? And especially if you're going to come back with a lot of data that's going to be disorienting. And so we start the coaching relationship first, we launch a 360, and by that time the results have been reported. There's enough time between the coach and the coachee to now have that conversation. And we're going to talk about the importance of building contacts to the 360, right? Remember, we spent time talking about personal line of sight and building the story and understanding the story and where the client is. That is a prerequisite before doing a 360, right? Because if we do 360 without a context to it, which is what story that they're in, what's their ambition, what's their values, you hit them with data of other people's perception, it's completely disorienting. And so doing a personal strategy and line of sight first and have that ready before you bring more data into it is critical aspect of things, especially with people that have not had any 360 before. Physicians, nurses. In healthcare, 360 is not a common thing. It's usually either at the executive level but doing a 360 without a context, we find to be completely disorienting. And if you don't have the trust that you're going to be able to support them through that disorientation, it's very hard to kind of build the trust and move forward with that. Dorothy, we did tons of it in Moffitt. You remember those days and how disorienting it is when we put it in front of some of the physician.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think some of that disorientation comes from some of the performance evaluation systems in place use a 360 feature that allows colleagues and others to give feedback. And then so you're working basically against their experience with their respective boss and how they have used that information. Have they used that in a punitive or corrective kind of way? Have they just done the copy and paste and, thrown it across the table? So in addition to, a true 360 not being all that common or familiar for those folks, it's kind of working against how some 360 has been used by others around them, for them or with them, or sometimes against them. So it's a very delicate path to walk.
I just wanted to share one thing to see if you have feedback, and I don't know if every part of the healthcare country is like this. At least in Minnesota, the companies I've kind of partnered with, like docs are getting surveyed all the time. Patient experience or whatever. Like, and a lot of these people 400, 500 reviews. And when I've talked to people about personal 360s, I just see this, like, their face goes ashen and they're just like, not another review. And it was kind of, and obviously non-healthcare executives don't have every salesperson review them on whether they were nice or not. And where I'm going with this is I have this loose sense that there's this fatigue in healthcare about being surveyed all the time. And I was wondering how healthcare leaders, whether it's nursing, physician, whatever, are receptive to, quote, another survey when they feel judged all the time. Just open dialogue from the coaches.
Yeah, one of the things about that is I reflect back on patient fatigue for types of assessments. Okay, so you've had a CTI, you've had an X-ray, you've had this panel, you've had this. That your patient needs. You need to do a different type of scan that gives you information you don't have, because your patient is fatigued of assessments and scans for their complex problem. Do you withhold the idea of bringing that forward or providing that for them? Typically, the physician will say no, correct? Now, they'll have the conversation with their patient about, I know that you're tired of this. I mean, you guys, from your experience, whatever, you'll have that, empathetic conversation. You'll still want to push forward with that specific thing that you need to get the information you need. And I typically will reflect back with the physicians and say, this gives you data from a different perspective that is extremely valuable. Sometimes when there's resistance, I'll reflect back to the patient experience, and I'll say, if you're missing something with a patient, would you want your staff to tell you about it? Well, of course. If you're missing something about your relationship with the people around you, including your patients, would you want your staff to tell you about it? I'll get a moment of silence, but typically, the answer is already there. Now, I will say that there have been times where I recognized that doing a 360 would cause more harm than good in that moment. Again, timing is everything. And what I'll do in that case, like where this one physician, he was head of a very visible surgical residency program. He was a TV celebrity in the local area and all that. And he felt attacked by this idea of a 360. And I could tell that this was going to damage the relationship beyond my ability to salvage it if I wouldn't proceed forward. So what I did was I said, all right, let's hold that idea for now. Give me the names of 3 or 4 people who you absolutely trust, who could give me, and here's a kicker. I said, who could give me advice, not feedback, who could give me advice on how you could be successful in the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days. And of course, you know what I got from them, right? Because these are people that cared about it. And they wanted him to be successful. So they gave me all the feedback that I needed and some good advice. But there's times where you've had to back off the formal aspect and just recognize what's best for the coaching relationship and the ability to move forward through this painful part of it.
So let's build on that then, because that's so critical. Surveying or 360 is a tool in your toolbox that you, the coach, choose when is the right time to deploy. And you can deploy it electronically, or you can deploy it, as Dan says, give me 3 people, I'll talk to them, right? It's a tool, but it's a powerful tool, because if you know that your client does not have enough self-awareness, then that's the way to go bring some self-awareness, is to go ask people to hold the mirror and say, here it is. Or you can go spend a day and shadow them, right? You can do a 360 by just shadowing someone. So it's a tool in your toolbox that's very powerful to bring forward. Here's how I position it with a client, right? I start with a conversation that leadership is an assessment by others, right? It's not, you can say you're a leader, I can say I'm a leader, but it's an assessment by others of my leadership. So I don't know how well I'm doing as a leader until I get a confirmation, an assessment by others of my leadership. That's one entry point. I always have the conversation from that aspect of definition. Second is that also leadership is also about our identity. And our identity is defined by others and not just by ourselves. And the conversation is, what do you think your identity is? And I get them to kind of go through and I write it down, and it says, okay, if I go talk to, like Dan said, 3 people you trust, would they confirm that that's the scriptures you just described yourself? And if it's yes, great, it's a confirmation. Or if it's no, then let's go figure it out. The other is not only what your current identity is, but also what is your desired identity that you want. And how do we know whether we're there or not? Because leadership is an assessment by others. So I come to it from a, do you care about your identity? Do you care about your leadership? We need other people confirmation and assessment. Let's go get it. And if they're ready for it, then we go. If they're not ready for it, it's not the right tool. And then that's kind of go back to Elizabeth, the whole aspect. When they say no, right, then that's my also signal of, I need to explore that further of what else is going on that they're saying no to, finding out what other people assessment of them is, right? Like the curiosity keeps going of really trying to work there because I'm trying to help them, right? Josh.
I'm wrestling with how you get somebody to do a good personal line of sight without that external insight to really identify where they're truly at. I think it's one thing for somebody with poor insight to be like, I'm here and I want to go there, when maybe others would say they're not even where they think they are. And so I'm interested in thoughts on that.
Well, remember, personal line of sight is an ongoing process, not a one-time shot. And so that's how always start with, let's download what you know. Let's download your own view. What's your desire? Where do you think you are? Where you want to be? Then let's go get some more data. It's either confirms what you already have on paper or dislodge what you thought, and then let us work through that. And let's look at what people said and let's filter it, because you don't have to react to everything, Josh.
Yeah.
Right? Like people said all these things. Well, what's the filter? Do I need to go change everybody's perception, or do I go work on the things that matters because I have a line of sight? So it's an iterative process. And I'll show you later an example where we had to go back and readjust the plan. Like we thought we were going to work on these 3 things, but then people told us there's 6 other things that you ought to spend time on. Like, oh shoot, let's, you told me one thing, I found other things. And this is when you realize you undercharged the whole engagement.
Yeah.
And Dorothy, you've probably been there. It's like oh,
Yeah.
they told us this is an easy thing. I'm
Yeah.
giving an easy doc or an easy executive, and then you get into it, and then you start talking to people, and it's like, oh shoot, I should have triple charged the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that to me has made 360s really most useful is to approach this with what you described as filter just now, Mo, and that is really partnering with a client to say, whose feedback are you interested in? And that's sometimes the issue with the formal ones, where you have to just populate all these groups of perspectives, like peers and direct reports and bosses and etc. And if there are too many voices in there that the client frankly doesn't care about, the whole data point, the collection of data points becomes, you know, much less than an MRI or a CT scan in comparison, but an ultra subjective and not even respected perspective. So really, even if you're stuck with a formal 360, I've surprised clients by saying, tell me whose perspective you are interested in. And if they take one group completely out, I allow them for now to do so, to just show, look, you know, I'm not interested in feedback that comes from people you don't respect or you don't care about. That's an interesting thing to explore later on, why you don't care about them or why you don't respect them. But giving the control first to them, saying, here's actually something that concerns me, or here, that is a perspective that's really important to me.
Chris, we haven't heard your voice today. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just absorbing everything. I've done a fair amount of 360 assessments, usually validated emotional intelligence, and they're always really interesting. I Yeah, I mean, I agree with most everything said here. I kind of fall back. I mean, from this program, I've learned so much about just being curious and letting things being driven by your client. And I find that in my past experience that with these 360 assessments is give them some advanced visibility to it, not too much advanced because they can dwell on it for too long. And then, and just ask this, be curious, and what do you think about these results, and so on, and things. I haven't had a case yet where a client has not, by looking at the assessment results, figured out what they might need to work on and have been open to wanting to change. But I guess it all depends on the 360 too. How good is it, and what kind of questions there are, and if there's user feedback and so on. But that's my experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is so
Totally,
important. Go ahead.
totally agree, Chris, in that it depends on the tool itself and what information it's going to give you. And quite realistically, I mean, working with some clients, the tool itself, the 360, gives them a chance to actually look at their positive self as well. I have many clients that, you know, the 360 result is much better than they actually assess themselves. And I have found at the executive level, they generally assess themselves harsher than what they are. And so it helps me to rebalance that positive piece and reconnect those things. So that's one thing to observe. But then again, you know, what's the, as Mo has said, you know, what's happening in the team? Is it psychologically safe to give these 360s? Well, they're going to know who I am, and I'm not going to give a poor result to it because I know that, you know, they're going to do this. And so preparation for the person giving the 360, you know, always look to support using some other tool. And I've often done the debrief with the manager inside the debrief, right? Not just with the client, but also the manager, so that we're having a conversation about this perception. And so particularly when it comes to working with female executives, this has often been helpful with their assessments.
Yep. Yep. And one of the caveat is who's asking for the 360, right? When the manager is asking for the 360, then my antenna goes up and saying, okay, am I replacing what you're supposed to do, which is you're supposed to give your team member, your physicians, your executives feedback, but instead of you giving them the feedback, you want me to do it. So that's has something to do also. I would rather have, like Dorothy was saying, I would rather have the client really see the value and then connecting with that. The other is when we started this literally 20 years ago, there was no 360 in healthcare, especially for physicians. It did not exist. We had to create it from scratch. We hired a faculty from Harvard that got us validated and build observable behavior that build the instrument. And he even said the cutoff is 55 questions. Like you go beyond 55 questions, it's not going to happen. So they had scientific behind it if we can be able to do that. So we had to build something because it did not exist. There's more these days, but ours still the only healthcare one that really was designed for that. And then there is an interview with stakeholders. So in your practice, as you go out practice, if you want to launch a 360, this is an easy one to launch. It's all electronic, so you can just say, kind of work through that. And then we'll talk also about the interview process for that. We talked about the kind of the whether we want to use it for prioritizing the development or kind of connecting it to confirm. So there's also post 360, and I have an example of that. If you're doing it in person, and I would welcome thoughts from the master coaches of what other questions, but here's some questions I use when I'm interviewing stakeholders. Instead of sending them a survey, these are the type of questions. So I start with an identity questions. What words do you use to describe this person as a leader today, right? I want words because I then use that as a bubble for here's what the words that people use to describe you, which the words that people use to describe you is basically your identity. So I always find this question is very insightful and easy for people to answer, right? Versus hitting them with, what is the feedback that you're willing to give this leader? But if I just ask for word to describe, that's top of mind that people are willing to share. What does this person do well as a leader? What suggestion or advice, like Dan was saying, what advice do you have for this other person? And then if I'm targeting specific competency that I know I need to drill down, like in this case, making connection, then I'm asking for those. Like, how can this person make a better connection with you? Or if there's other competency that I'm targeting and I'm deeper on that. And I also like scale. Like, how would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you describe the authenticity of this person? On a trust basis, how on a scale of 1 to 10, on effectiveness on a scale of 1 to 10. So the nice thing about non-electronic interview is that you can customize it on the fly to what you're trying to discover. The downside is it's very timely, it's timely consuming, especially if you have 10 people to interview, trying to just schedule 10 people takes forever, right? And then being able to compile all of that. So this is, if you have to do it, just know that it's going to take a lot of your time. And if you're charging for it, make sure you charge enough money for it, because it's an expensive way to go about it, right? Other thoughts or, yep.
I had a question, Mo.
Yeah.
What is the minimum number of people you would say for someone to get, when in your experience, a reasonable 360? I heard Dan earlier say, like, give me at least 3 to 4 people that you trust. That seemed to be sort of the number I was thinking, right? So it's also safe for the person that you're speaking with, that it doesn't necessarily come out who that person was. But what in your experience is that minimum, and at what point does it really flatten out?
What we like is we like to have a 3 in every category around the person. So 3 peers, 3 direct report, and 3 stakeholders or customer or extended, and then the manager is always 1. So 3, 3, 3, 9, and 110. So because in each category, when you're, it depends on what you're looking for, but one opinion is still one opinion. If you really want to look for trends and what really is someone's identity, you really need more people around them than one person that opinion, right? And so 3 in each category is really what we able to look for. And actually the system is designed that if there's less than 3 people, it won't show that data, because if you're trying to have confidentiality, it will cut it off because there's less than 3, you know who those people are. Except for the manager's always 1, so that you're gonna know who that is. But we try to kind of work through that. And so if you do it in person, I would say 3. If you're gonna do it electronically, we ask for 6 in each category.
Yeah.
So then you have a drop off of 50% response rate, so you get 3 at least minimum. If you have an executives, I usually go 3 for the board. That's usually where I go for more. If they're the executive level, then I want the board input on them. And I usually go to the board, so that will get them to 12.
In support there, Mo, observing the client in those spaces is probably your best feedback. Observe, 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 observe.
Yep. When we do executive coaching, or when Dan and I do bedside coaching, that's like our favorite thing, right? You follow the doc around, and you can see all the interaction. You don't need to figure out what the nurses are thinking, right? Dan is so good. Then he kind of like go to the side and talk with the nurse and gets all the inputs, and so he's more talkative than me. So he gets the real scoop of this is what the identity of this dog by talking to all the nurses and the techs.
Well, I'm also in scrubs, and I'm turning rooms with housekeeping. I'm transporting, I'm doing whatever I can to just be an extra set of helping hands. And it's amazing how people put 2 and 2 together and say, let me tell you about Dr. So-and-so.
Yep.
Let me tell you the real deal. They know why you're there, but as soon as you're helpful and not just a shadow, you're wiping down carts and doing all the other stuff, that's when they really start, talking to you, and you really get the feel for what's going on.
Shadowing, observing is the best. I love going to a full day of meetings, bedside, OR, whatever it is, so that we can really, really observe and see the whole story. And it makes a huge difference. That's the best 360 you could do. Second level is you call and interview people. Third level is you send a survey and you get that input. The survey is very powerful, and you'll see some report. I think we sent you a sample report. They're very robust, and there's just so much data that you can have a dissertation on it. There's so much data in it that you can infer a lot of things. And when people are generous with comment, then you can do a lot with it versus connecting with that. I go back to Pauline comment about hidden strength. We analyzed, I don't have a slide on this, but you can imagine we have like tons of data in healthcare. We've done 360 forever, right? And people always have the perception that clinicians are not self-aware, and that when you do 360, that they have a lot of blind spot. Well, we find it's completely the opposite. Physicians and clinicians are tougher on themselves than what other people, and we find a lot of hidden strength, not a lot of just blind spots. Now, there's extreme on both ends of things, but in general, we find that there's a lot of hidden strength versus just blind spots. And people are always tougher on themselves than what the general aspect. So you talk about stress and burnout, 360 sometimes is just a reliever of that because they were just way too much beating themselves up and thinking, and they give themselves 1 and 2 versus like 7, while everybody else is giving them 6 and 7. Galen.
Can you talk a tiny bit about the trust building of us as the coach with the stakeholders? I did one interview on the receiving end of that of a leader who is struggling quite a bit and not well liked. And in that, I didn't believe she wasn't going to go tell him everything I was saying. And not, I mean, she would say, oh, it's a female physician leader, but I won't tell you who she is. And she said, are you sure you really have that many lower scores about him? They can't be that low. And I was like, whoa, I'm not. So I sensed she was still an advocate for her client, and I had zero trust of. So at that point, I told her to put what answers she wanted because. So you don't have the time to build that trust, but if you're going to do live interviews, they have to believe that real feedback is being asked for.
Yes, that we go back to the ethics and the confidentiality of what does it mean to be a coach, right? We as coaches, our role is to be the recorder and the scribe of the truth, not. You could be an advocate, but it's not our role when we're doing 360. We are a pure recorder of the truth. Once we bring our own biases to this, then we really are not helping our client. Now, we tend to, when we debrief, we try to kind of provide more context to it. Like, oh, somebody rated you a 1. Let's talk more about that. That's my role. Not to say, oh, that's okay that they rated you a 1. It's not my job. My job is helping the client discover what is the story behind this and the context, and or should we really even worry about it? What you experience is not like, remember the session on ethics? That's not that's not your job as a coach. You can't build trust because you're not being a recorder. You're just being, a marketer of this person. And that's not our job, right? Yep. Pauline and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, not to muddy the waters, but also remembering your own view and your own biases and perceptions also change in this process about the person that you're working with as a coach, to add on to Mo's piece. But I also want you to consider the changing workforce that we have at the moment with a high level of people on the spectrum, and the impact of assessments and how they respond in assessments and how they're showing up in their workplace. And I went through a period of time where I was getting a lot of people on the spectrum that were coming for their 360 and for their performance review, because the leadership team didn't know how to handle them. And they didn't understand the perspective that the person was able to do. So we have a changing workplace at the moment, and sort of folks on the spectrum are adding a different element to it, and so where they may not have the tact that has been previously in the workplace, and they might just blurt out the feedback. That can be taken as kind of a negative in that against their personality trait, and yet the honesty of that can be very, very valuable. So just understanding the spectrum as well for your clients.
Elizabeth.
Sorry. I was just wondering if you see very different results on a 360 for one group of people than the others surveyed, how do you go about learning more? I know we have comments and those types of things, but how do you approach that when one group maybe rates the individual much lower than their leader or other stakeholders that were interviewed?
Yeah, so category of
Yeah,
whether
like
it's
their
direct
peers,
report
maybe
or-
rate them lower, whereas maybe their direct reports, their boss, even they themselves have very similar ratings, but the one group is so much lower. Obviously, it needs to be addressed. I'm just not sure how you go about assessing that.
We call that gold. That is
That's
gold.
exactly right.
Yeah,
I think one step of the debrief for me that I find very rich for the client is to identify who are your biggest fans, who are your harshest critics, and how does that make sense? And it also differs by obviously the competency that's being assessed. So providing feedback to others, how well do your stakeholders really know your ability to do so? Or strategy, how strategic are you in your meetings? Can your direct reports really assess that? So that's where you mine that gold for really specific and actionable insights.
Yeah, yeah. And also the type of questions where your, let's say, peer rated you lower than others, the type of questions also matter. Like, let's take a clinical, because there's some questions about whether you use evidence-based and whether in your decision making, whether you are eager to improve quality of care, right? If my peers are rating me low in that category, that I gotta stop there, right? Like, why do I have a perception by my peer that I am not evidence-based, or I'm not showing that I'm eager to improve something or connect with that? So I always use that as a set of questions of curiosity, right? Let the data become the trigger of questions, but also the power of this is this range, right? So like in this person, look at their peer, all the way to 1 and all the way to 7 with an average of 3.86, right? That's a wide range of evaluations, right? Some people think you're a 7, some people think that you're a 1. Okay, well, what's the story there? Why is there a variation? And so the conversation about the variation of that. But then also the difference between the self versus the manager versus the peer versus the direct report. So you're kind of going up and down, but also the distribution matter. And when there is a distribution, like in this case, this person not presenting a unified leadership message, and they're self-aware. I mean, so this one, like, they are already self-aware. They rated themselves a 1, but then there's a lot of other people, including their peer and others, they're saying, yeah, you have a lot of improvement to do on this. And so I always use it as curiosity of what is the story behind the data. And a lot of it is I stop when there is consistency from one question to the other, or is there one person that, like, I had situations where one direct report was going 1, 1, 1, 1 on everything. Like, okay, well, what's the story behind it? And usually there is a story and something happened, and so do we need to react to it, or do we just take it into the aggregate of everything else versus, oh my God, somebody rated me a 1. And that's, again, as a coach, our role is to give context to what else is going on. But like, if you look at this person, you know, this peer, very low. So I needed to kind of connect with that, and they're lower than what they rated themselves. So I got to ask more questions around that.
Yeah, I want to build on that. Based on the question, what do you do with large differences? I think that's all I look for. I look for differences, and not so much focusing on the numbers at a 6.2 or 6.7. That's really almost irrelevant to me. It's really all about the pattern. Are they higher? Are they lower? Is there homogeneity in the response, or is there heterogeneity? And that's what creates the questions that are then meaningful for the coaching conversation.
Yeah. So let's build on that, Dorothy, because that's what this graph is.
Can I
right?
quickly ask a question, Mo,
Yes.
on that though? When you said like you discover the story behind those outliers,
Yeah.
how do you really do that? Since you cannot, necessarily, I mean, in a direct interview, it's one thing, but how do you do that? Do you go back to the person that answered it, ask them? But you can also not necessarily breach confidentiality the other way. So how do you discover that? Is that just really on a hypothetical level, or like
It's
why would
asking-
somebody rate you all once, but then you've
Yeah.
already like I don't know. I was just curious about
It's a coaching moment. It's a coaching moment. Remember, the tool is about self-awareness. So it's a coaching moment for me to ask the client about what is the story, right? Like, if there's a trend that's worth stopping at, then I'm going to stop and say, okay, this looks like something here. Can you tell me more about this? Right? I'm coming to it from a curiosity perspective. And if in what they answer tells me a lot. If they're saying, oh, it's a disgruntled employee and you can't please them and so on. So it's like, okay, well, tell me more. Is it your perception? Is it reality? Is it so on? Or if they're like, no, yeah, I understand. And in this situations, we were shorthanded. And yes, I did not come across well. And I was short with my team and kind of understand that. And it's like, oh, yeah, there's self-awareness. How can we next time control your anger and not show up that way? Right? The data is about you having evidence-based to ask more pointed questions about how people perceive your client that you're not able to observe yourself. That's the power of this. It's the data. As a doctor, it's your diagnosis, your lab results. Tell me about your eating habit. Why is your cholesterol high? That's exactly what you do. And like, okay, well, the result came in this way. Tell me what are all the things behind the scene about your habit? Are you exercising, not exercising, work through that? And I'm asking now further and further questions. And I usually, I study the 360 report way ahead of time, highlight a bunch of stuff, take the data and the comment, right? And I triangulate on those things. If somebody rated someone low on communication and the comment are supporting that, then I'm like way gonna zoom on that. But if I see a trend that is like few people said this thing, but not enough in the comment, then I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on those aspects, right? There's 55 observable behavior. You can't spend a lot of time on that, but it's your lab results, and you're gonna review the lab results way ahead of time so that you can use it for more diagnosis. Lori and Josh.
Yeah, I had a client nurse leader, more in a regional part of a system. And as we were going over her results, what she was focused on was it was really her manager who had the lowest scores for her. And so it just kind of opened up this conversation about, well, how long, had that manager been her manager? And, we kind of talked more around what had recently happened in the organization, and a really good opportunity for her to go back and kind of strengthen this relationship with her manager and be, again, on her own part, curious about, what this manager was expecting and not seeing, because everybody else who she was in more contact on a regular basis was kind of seeing this behavior, but her manager wasn't. And so it was just this, and at first I think she was very reticent to kind of have these conversations with her manager. But once she did, it opened up to this whole different relationship that they now have. And the manager is giving her feedback on a more regular basis so that she has an awareness of what it is, that she needs to do and how she needs to show up at more of this, the bigger system wide kinds of meetings and things like that. So it was, her perception of what this meant, was very different when she actually had the conversations.
Yeah. Yep. It's data. It's powerful data. It enriches your coaching relationship and engagement. It's the diagnosis, and it allows us to be more targeted. It allows us to, just not only say, what do you want to work on, but like, what should we work on, right? Like, that's more powerful data. That's why in our leadership program, we do the 360, because then it guides whatever we coach and train people on, because it's the diagnosis. It's connecting us with that. Josh.
I was going to share a personal firsthand experience of getting disparate 360 results back with in response to Michaela's comments. So maybe 8 to 10 years ago, the St. Luke's Clinic did 360 evals for all their employed docs. I think it was all employed docs. At least in primary care, we all got one. And I had very disparate results between the front office people that did the scheduling and greeted people at the front and my colleagues, the rest of everyone else. And it earned me a couple of coaching sessions. And so just going through it, I can share what it was like. It was interesting data because I did not have any awareness that I had such a negative relationship with those front office people. And by meeting with the coach, I think I got 2 coaching sessions because I had 2 red marks or whatever it was on the Pulse 360. And it was very obvious right away that the only time I ever interacted with those people up front was when I was irritated about something with my schedule. And so it was just a constant cycle of me coming up there and bagging on them and going back and never interacting positively. But focused on the coaching piece of it, it was very natural for the coach to ask me, what do you think is driving these lower scores with this individual group? And it was the questions that it was on, and I can't remember what it is now, enough time has passed. But with that result and the disparate group, it was very clear, very easy to kind of problem solve and then make a game plan for like, oh, I need to like say hi to them in the morning, like, and positively interact with them so that when something does go sideways, there's a better bank of built up trust.
That is such a critical aspect of what's more important than just the data is what are we going to do about it? First, do we need to do anything about it? That's one. 2 is now, what is it that we want to do about it? And how can I help you? Right? How do we confirm that this thing, been addressed or resolved, right? And that's kind of, when do we retake another data set? So like, again, I use it as the lab results. Like, okay, the lab result is this. we're going to go do something. We're going to give you this medication. You're going to do some more exercises, and then you're going to come back. We're going to do another test, right? And then see if things have improved. And so it's the same aspect. I see Chris had a question about like frequency and pulse versus full assessment versus, you know, I think the detailed 360, in my opinion, the detailed 360 is powerful, that it's a great diagnosis, that it's kind of like I'm ordering the full panel, right, of test. And so I'm going to do the disc, I'm going to do the 360, the detailed 360, and I'm going to have that. But I don't need to do that like every 6 months or so on. That's a lot. But at least I have a baseline of very robust data sets that I can work on for a while. Then I can substitute with one specific area that I want to do a pulse, maybe just to kind of check if those things have improved or not. And if people are going through a full development cycle, you know, like a fellowship or other that is a year or 2 year long, I really want to remeasure at the end and compare. And I remeasure everything because I want to see if strength have improved and development areas have improved. And if not, what are really the areas that I can continue to work on, right? Now, if you're gonna have coaching as a business, that's your source of income, okay? Having diagnosis is gonna be important because it creates more need for your services. I'll let that sink in for a second. Okay. So if you want to create a need for your services, then having a diagnose tool is important, because value does not start until there's a breakdown. Value does not start until there's a breakdown. And if people think that they're perfect, then they don't need your help. And so having a 360 is a way for you to also help diagnose, so that people say, oh, I need you as my doctor. You catch that? We have a whole session, next session is all about that. But value does not start until there's a breakdown. 360 is a tool set for that. Okay, I see some people smiling, so. All right. All right, couple more things on this, and then we break on the case study. Graphics are important. And so what's great about the 360 is it plots people responses. And so this person, red is themselves, and then everybody else is other colors. When they rated themselves higher than what other people rated them, that's a blind spot. That means they're not self-aware. And this is everybody's data, so it's very indicative that this person thinks higher than what other people think. Versus this one is this person rated themselves way lower than what other people think of them. So they really are too tough on themselves, right? That's a hidden strength. And so how do I really make sure that I help this person really work through that? And then I dial into that. And then that's where now the data now goes into questions by questions, individual category by individual category. I can look at range, variations, difference between individuals. And what's cool about this tool is that if you're doing it for a group of people in the same organization, then you really are comparing them to other people. So this becomes kind of like the truth of what's the norm within that group. It's very helpful. It doesn't mean anything if it's one person, but if you have 20 people in the organization, then this tells me is like, shall I pay attention to this? Or is this the whole group that is in the same norm? So individually result for that, you can see like I would highlight the things I want to visit with the client. So, and I usually highlight those. Like this is a hidden strength, clearly. This person rated themselves very low while everybody else rated them high. Like what's going on there, right? So high energy, maintain high energy level by attending to his own well-being. Like everybody thinks that they are, they don't think that they are. It's like, okay, what's the question? The question there is, what's the story, right? So robust results, then their top strength, which is what the highest rating by others, their development, which is the lowest rating by others, then the gap, and these are also powerful gap. They're like these are, this person has a negative gap of their perception for the other people perception. Initiate difficult conversation when needed, right? Like, okay, great. This, when I'm going to debrief with this person, I'm going to spend time like, why? So clearly this person has a lot of negative gaps. So i.e. blind spots, right? When the gaps are negative, it's other people think less than what they rated themselves, right? So like this one creates an environment of trust where people feel free to openly share ideas and opinion. This is our friend Alice, right? Which you're gonna debrief later. But this person was rated lower on that. Then there's a set of questions in there. What are behaviors that would make this person better? What are positive experiences? So, and people put their comments and connecting with that. So, and what I usually do is, and I think in the case studies we have that, I was gonna show you, okay, can you see my screen now? Okay, so this is what I was referring to, is making sure that you have the people working on their personal strategy map before you do the debrief, and especially just where they are and what's their vision for themselves, at least those two. And so that when I debrief the 360, it becomes the filter of, let's take the data and filter it through your ambition and what's your values. That's, if somebody says, this rated me low on integrity and one of my value is high integrity, right? Like, I gotta stop at that, because it's very important for me that people perceive me as high integrity, but some people rated me lower. Like, I gotta stop on that, right? So then there's self-assessment, so then I can develop the development plan. So that's a critical aspect. The other aspect is, and all of us could probably recall various situations where when we debrief in 360, we have to really remember that it's an emotional experience. It's an emotional experience. People, when you're challenging their identity and their perception of themselves, you're gonna dislocate them. And I mean, I had people in tears, I had people in anger, I had people, because this is not easy, especially if they have not used to getting 360 and getting feedback from others. So just kind of keeping those in mind. We take all the content and we plot it, and the words that are the biggest are basically the words that has been repeated over and over again by people, right? And so positive attitude, enthusiasm, creative work, positive attitude, that's basically this person's identity, that they have positive attitude, that they're enthusiastic, and then Under improvement, if you take everybody's comment and plot it, it's basically saying this person listening is an opportunity, openness to other ideas an opportunity, create an environment of trust is an opportunity, and showing empathy is an opportunity, right? And so all those aspects show up from that. These bubble charts are my favorite because it's literally the identity of people. When people use the same word over and over again, that tells me that that's my identity of connecting with that. So so the report kind of then details some actions, and then this is where then we go from what people say to let's take some priority areas and say, which one do you really want to work on, right? Based on this data sets, we can work on everything. Let's work on what matters. And that's why doing some prioritization would be critical, right? You can't just fix everything. And so connecting it with that and kind of working through it. Questions, or I was not monitoring this side conversation. Any questions or comments in the chat?
Mo, I've got a question. First of all, thanks for your grace and allowing me to join a little bit late today. I apologize for that. I'm mindful that a survey, a 360 survey, can create some positive emotional attachment or a negative emotional attachment, depending on the circumstance that a person might be in. I wouldn't want to engage in I'm thinking just out loud that I wouldn't want to engage in a 360 survey if it was going to reinforce some negative emotional attachment with that leader. Maybe you could explore that a little bit. Are there times where you wouldn't do that, or you would need to do an assessment first? And maybe you've already discussed this earlier. If so, say, hey, watch the video from the first part of the session and I'll do it. That would be my question. Is there an assessment done first to identify those for whom the 360 may be harmful because it reinforces a negative emotional attachment with that leader?
Yeah, I'll just open it up for other coaches in your experience before I jump in. Lori, Dan, Dorte, Wes.
I was trying to read the side chat to see if I had missed anything, so I didn't get the key question. My apologies.
Well, I'll use an example. I was in the same clinic structure that Josh was. We had 360s that went out, and in my clinic, one of my colleagues, the nurses and front staff were just waiting for the 360 to beat up on this individual provider, and the comments were terrible. And it could have been predicted, and it was not helpful because then this provider sees all of these negative comments and blows up. And it really served, my perception at least is in that case, it served to as a cudgel to bludgeon this physician. And so instead of helping identify opportunities for improvement, it was something that served to reinforce negative perceptions about this provider in a way that made it harder to overcome those, because it was really reinforced that, oh my gosh, we don't like this person.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if there could have been in that particular case or in other similar situations, do you need to have a little bit of a sense of the groundwork before engaging in that to make sure that it doesn't do that? That's where I'm trying to get at with this.
Yeah, I've found myself spending more and more time trying to figure out why someone is requesting a 360 for someone else. If it's not a self-request, I've become, and it's a little bit cynical, but I've become rather jaded a little bit, because more than once was I basically told, we need this person to hear from the people that they are X. And that is a terrible reason to ask for a 360. So I think there goes a lot of prep work into whoever requests the 360 to understand what their motivation is, and to also educate them about what it is that they can expect from a 360 in a positive, in a negative way. It's important for them to know, will they get the results as the boss, or is that the choice of the person who received the 360? So I think a lot of important groundwork has to happen before I'm convinced that we should do a 360 on someone.
Yeah. And Josh, well, Frank, the other thing we said is the timing is important. Building trust is important before you do diagnosis. Context of why are we doing it is important. And personal line of sight is prerequisite before the 360, in my opinion. You need to be in dialogue with this doctor about what do they think their identity, do they want to know what their identity is, do understand that there's a breakdown. And so do we need to run diagnosis to validate what they think or what they want to do? It has to come from them. Like before you order, your lab, you want to talk to the patient first and say, we're going to order a lab. Do you want to order a lab, right? Versus let's order the lab, then they'll just, so back to Dorte is be careful of why are you ordering the test? Why are you ordering the 360? Is it for development, or is it for somebody's not doing their job of providing feedback to someone?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's the latter, then that's not my job. If the managers is not providing the necessary feedback for that physician, it's not my job to do their job. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where I push back and say, wrong thing you're going to add more fuel to the fire than everything else. But if you say, we care about this doc, work with them, coach them, and use whatever necessary tool for that, then that's a different conversation. Dan.
Just hearing you say that, what was going through my mind, and the previous comment about folks just sort of chomping at the bit for the 360 opportunity, is the 360, it is a reflection on the individual, but it's a limited data set, and it's also a reflection on the team around. So we've got to think about, in a limited data set, could there be a team failure, if you will, to work together? I mean, creating that psychological safety to provide feedback. Sometimes it's the individual at the center. But, we've all seen teams where folks get into groupthink. And so I would take every one of these surveys with a grain of salt and say, what's the larger context? Clearly, if there's an agenda, as Mo describes, that's really problematic. But let's say there's no agenda, but folks are really getting into some groupthink. How do we actually get the entire group to move? And that's a harder one, but it does sort of touch on some of the lessons we had from the coaching session on how you coach groups.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a cool set of points that were made earlier.
Yep.
Totally support that, Dan.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We've done 360 for whole group, for individual teams. It's very telling when you start looking at the composite results. That tells you a lot, right? And you as a coach, you become very observant. And sometimes you already know the diagnosis of a team just by interacting with them, that you don't need the lab, right? I can tell you what's going on with this team. I don't need a 360, right? I can do a quick 5 dysfunction of a team. Let's just rate ourselves on 1 to 5. Let's just see where we are at. Clearly we have a trust issue. Let's go work on that, right? So sometimes it's like, you don't need a hammer for everything. You can tell as you become a good diagnostician that you can tell what you're dealing with. Again, I was saying earlier, a lot of executive coaching ends up being team coaching. In my experience, and usually now I add it to the proposal and the roadmap. There's a box that says team coaching is a possibility. I put it up front is because once I go find out, then it's your team. It's not just you. So let's really work through that. Laura, you had your hands up. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, I think, around this whole piece about the stakeholders, I think it's, what's built in at the beginning to help the stakeholders best understand how to give the feedback and what kind of feedback and just kind of the whole process. And I know I've been in situations where I've spent more time with them, sometimes even as a group, before the 360 goes out. And then afterwards. So then what is the process for sharing any of the feedback, if any, and by who? Is it the client? Is the coach have anything to do with that? Kind of so that they know kind of what their involvement is at the beginning, during, and after. And I think that helps to kind of keep people, I guess, more aware and hopefully give more appropriate feedback.
Yep. That's awesome.
Always including on your scope of work the ability to analyze what's kind of going on. For me, Frank, what you said, Danny, in supporting that is around the system. What in the system is being rewarded if somebody is now using that tool as a way to, give feedback to somebody, so there's a whole systemic piece in here which enables us to actually influence change and build team strength, but also sort of is the reward mechanism for the organization. This is a punitive tool rather than a development tool, and that is key to the success of the tool and the trust of the tool. And so you might be experiencing a situation where now it's been abused in its purity. I would pull back from that line and try a different tack of how do we actually get that feedback to the doc in a safe way for everybody to contribute to that. So that's where your group circles and that are going to come in, and the observations and the real-time feedback to create that safe place rather than the punitive tool of a 360. And I have experienced it where the feedback really was that there was an incident that occurred that wasn't resolved effectively internally by the human resources group. And this was now their mechanism to get rid of that doc.
Yep.
Okay.
Then that becomes then 360 then becomes now labeled as this is the tool for getting rid of a doc, right? So then it becomes a negative experience in connecting with that. So we have to be very careful as we walk into these scenarios of when you get a request, how are you using the tool for your connecting with it? I want to go back to an earlier comment at the beginning with Galen on what Marshall was talking about, that they also connect the payment to the results, right? Now 360 becomes very important, but it's not the only tool if you're going to connect your results, your payment to the results, right? In the executive coaching, you're also talking about performance of the revenue and expenses and P&L. And so usually you're connecting your coaching to a business solution, not just a leadership solution. So kind of connecting with that. Now, I'm comfortable enough in my coaching these days that I am willing to go in and say, we do a 360 before, we do a 360 after, and based on the improvement, then you pay me X, Y, and Z. I'm comfortable with that because I know we'll make a difference. But you have to be very careful of how you're going to connect your payment to what is measurable, you know. So just kind of keep that in mind. As if Marshall's talking about it, is because he plays in a different space of executive coaching that is easy to measure what the performance of that executive, you know, what's their scorecard and connecting with that. So any other questions? I think we're going to take a break before the breakout. And then what we're going to do, the breakout is we have the case study of you going to debrief Alice on the result on her comment of the 360. And there's some difficult comment in there. And so how you're going to be able to deliver that message. So we're going to do that. But any questions, comments on the 360?
And that case study is available to download in the chat box right now.
Great, thank you. Okay. Leah, you've been quiet. I haven't heard your voice today.
Hello.
Hello.
This is a great conversation. I think 360s are interesting and they're brought up all the time. So I appreciate this conversation. We work with them all, very frequently.
Yeah. And there's some good 360 and there's some bad 360.
Mm-hmm. And you're right, like the way in which you touch into that and walk them through it and build trust before and during that process is important.
Yeah. I can't believe that like Josh only got like 2 coaching sessions or like, you know, it's like, well, you know, that's, I don't know how you can build trust and work through that just by 2 sessions. Like you were rewarded with 2 coaching sessions.
I like what Dan said about the behavior suppression tool, because we used to do the Pulse 360. We had to do one every 2-3 years within our employed physician group. And I think it was well intended, but there's probably a reason why they did away with it because of all the reasons what Frank also shared. And I do believe in the remedial coaching that we sometimes do. They do have a role, and I'll try to steal that from you, Dan, the behavior suppression tool, which sometimes that's what some people need to be truly successful, right? And it can open up maybe their mind to engage in coaching for development and generative coaching and all those things that we're trying to provide here. But sometimes you just have to approach it differently, I fear.
I think one of the questions I had too really fast is that I think we run into, not very often because we position 360s in our talent development space as development tools and less about, you know, punitive or corrective action, so to speak, or performance improvement. How often do you get pushback around that difference? Because I think we try very hard to position 360s as a development tool that they must buy into and be excited about their development to engage in. But then we do get requests for the reason that you mentioned earlier, which is this person needs to see other people's feedback around this thing that we perceive as wrong or isn't going well. So what do you find in that tension, and how do you handle that when a client or a manager requests it and you see that disconnect? Because people aren't going to be in the mindset to get development if it's punitive.
Yeah, that's where as a coach you have to kind of be ready to push back on whether the 360 is appropriate or not at that time. And so like when people call and say, I want you to do a 360 on person, and that's the engagement they're giving me, it's like, no, wait a minute. What is it that tell me more of what is it? Why do you care about this person? And what is it that you're trying to develop and so on? 360, I may decide that 360 is the appropriate tool or not. Like, don't bring me the diagnosing tool yourself as being that, because then that's when we run into trouble. Then becomes 360 is the bad tool, punitive, just like, so I always insist that once I build trust and I build a connection with understanding about my client, then we can decide if the 360 is the appropriate or not. I may decide that interview might be more powerful. I may decide that shadowing is more powerful than 360 electronic. But they need to trust me that I'm the professional that will diagnose that. Tell me what you're trying to accomplish. Let me make the diagnosis. Don't dictate to me that I need to order lab and CT and MRI. Like, don't tell me that. I know what I'm the professional. So that's, is as you become more experienced in coaching, then you start really picking on that. Dorothy was homing in on that. It's like, just the way you get a request tells you a lot. And you gotta just stop and just say, there's more to this story that I'm not seeing here. Why are they insisting on 360? Oh, you want self-awareness. Okay, great. If that is the case, then let me work on self-awareness. Don't tell me, 360. Or have you provided them that feedback? Or do you just want me to be the scapegoat on that? So does that make sense? And so be ready as you get more and more comfortable to push back on the request of dictating which tool to use or not to use. There's other way to come to the same thing. Then I'm going to pick on you just because we know the type of request we get on this, on the misbehavior. Like,
Yep.
Hey, we have a misbehaving doc. We want you to do a 360, or like, well, wait a minute, So how many of those calls you get, Dan? All the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably 30% of my business is these bad behaving physicians. It's a whole different world, but it really is about setting those expectations and limits and being really clear about who's driving the tool usage. Because if the system's insisting on driving, I've walked away from lucrative business because the system wanted to weaponize and refused to let go of the idea of weaponizing the 360. Even with the VA, and their intentions weren't bad, but the VA on the East Coast wanted to do, they called and said, we've got 600 managers, we want to do a 360, but they refused to pay for anything other than a debrief, no follow-ups. I said, what if they get really terrible news? What if they receive devastating news? Where's the safety net? And, and then I got basically nothing. And it's like, so do you want the gig? I pinged all my fellow coaches who I knew they were contacting and say, don't buy into this. Don't buy into this. So this is where your ethics as a coach come into play. It's like, I'm not going to be a part of hitting somebody with a potential sledgehammer and then walking away.
Yeah.
We're just not going to do that. But yeah, with the difficult physicians, I would recommend that if they try to throw that to you too early, let yourself get seasoned and developed as a coach before you get involved in some of these really, really nasty situations. And not everything is coaching, right? We've learned that. Some of this stuff is performance management. If you want to go manage performance, but I really strongly recommend that you don't poison your 360s process that you want to use with leadership by using it as a weapon in all these cases. It's
not performance. It's
a tough line. It's a tough line, but
Raquel, you've been patient.
Oh, it was just a side comment, just like thinking about it's been such a rich conversation, and like if I had to categorize like my takeaways from this morning, really two things stood out from you all, like trying to coach a client, one whose feedback really matters, getting clear on that as they're looking at that. And then I loved what Lori said about sharing the data by who and to who. And I thought that was, for me, that's powerful to kind of put that back in control with the client and how they might use that as part of their like growth and development journey. So yeah, really, really good conversation today.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit after the break about what do you do with the data and how powerful it is for your clients to use it for further development and communicating. And I'll show you an example of a letter that, you know, the client decided that they're going to put it out there and give a summary. I was like, thank you for giving me the feedback. I take it as a valuable thing. And in the spirit of accountability, here's what you said, and here's what I'm going to work on. And please hold me accountable, right? Like that is truly someone committed to want to do something about it as an example of that. So closing the loop is as important as everything else, but it has to be the client in control, not the manager or you deciding what to do with it. It has to be they're in the driver's seat. You're just helping them get there. So, okay. Very rich conversation. So here's what we're going to do when we come back from break. We're going to break you into two and then an observer. And you're going to play the coach, and then one person is going to be Alice. So one person is going to be the receiving of the feedback, and then one is going to be the deliverer of the feedback. And your role is to debrief them and get them to commit to a plan. And so in the case study, there's a suggested development area and some suggestions on those development, and then there's an action plan. So you can try to get Alice to commit to, first, I don't know if Alice is going to accept your feedback, and two, if she does, then getting the other person to pick one or two area that they want to work on is really would be the success. Is you're able to debrief it and you're able to get them to commit to an action plan of that. Okay. We'll give you 30 minutes for that breakout. So you have enough time to be able to do that. I don't think we have time to switch, but I think we'll just do that because we want to spend time on the closing of the engagement after we come back. So, okay, clear on the instruction. You can download it from here, or I emailed it last night, and so you should have that in your email. Let's take a 15-minute break. It is, let's come back at 12:15. We'll take a little bit longer break that way. So it is 54 right now, 11:54 on my time. So we'll come back at 12:15, okay? Which would be 9:15 for the West Coast folks.
Sorry, Frank, we got cut off.
Oh, thank you. Those are some great comments. Yeah, and I felt like maybe I felt an energy shift at that point too. I thought,
Yes.
I pushed a little bit too hard at that point, is where I was thinking. I felt like maybe I was getting a little bit patronizing, and
Yeah.
I would have, on reflection, liked to have done that part a little bit differently.
Yes, and it could very well be that with a real client, that confrontation may have created a little bit more clarity on the hesitation, and then you could have taken that and make that kind of the focus. So well done, really well done.
Thank you.
Tell us more. What happened in those rooms? Observation. Was it easy? Was it difficult?
Can I just offer additional feedback, particularly for my group as well? Is that when another piece of gold that came up was around the response, well, that's dumb, right? Or that's just dumb, or they're dumb, or whatever in that conversation. There is an opportunity to talk about success. What would group success look like? What would your individual success look like? And that will do that same thing, transition you to that positive. And so that's another loop opportunity that I saw in our group. So it's a great job, Brian.
Yeah.
Good acting, Elizabeth.
Chris was
Leah was artful. I got to be difficult. And she was artful in talking about strengths and overextension of strengths. And mostly I thought she was wasting my time because I have results to meet. And this is like fluffy leadership stuff, you know. But then she kept coming back to, well, there might be gaps in the way you're seeing things and other people are. And so she did a good job of seeing them as overextension of strengths was really good because, you know, sometimes that might land differently or anyway. So she did an artful job of bringing me back to how we might make progress, even though I was mostly focused on checking the box like, oh yeah, I heard my 360, I can go back to my results oriented day. So she did a very nice job in spinning it in a way that might keep me engaged.
I also said that Leah really mirrored almost the way that Galen was showing up. So very factual, kind of the faster pace, kind of really helped to kind of move her more directly to getting to an action step quicker and really only focused on one or two areas in about a 15-20 minute time frame, which then helped, you know, versus to say, oh, well, there's all these opportunities for you, but really pick one or two.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Chris.
Yeah, I think Danny did a great job in responding to me. I tried to play a very sort of arrogant leader where, you know, there's a reason why I'm a D and why I'm in my place because I take charge, you know, this is how I got here. And did very good at trying to coaxing me down the pathway of, you know, if, you know, it was around the value of trust and whether that would benefit the situation at all and what could I do to do that? Am I open to trying something new to help build trust? But not necessarily being touchy-feely emotional because I was clearly not going down that path. That was this no way. I'm not going to be vulnerable. But am I willing to try some new things like involvement in decision making with my team to help build trust? So I thought he did good job heading down that path.
Yeah.
One thing that Frank really did marvelously well in anticipation of the pushback, and Rihanna played less of a in your face, I don't believe in any of this and this is BS, but the very hesitant, yeah, you know, saying the right things, but not really taking it on. And Frank set up the conversation, really not focused initially on the data points, but really more this is a tool and I'm interested in hearing what you want to get out of the tool. So really forcing the client to basically speak as if she had already accepted this as a tool that can give answers or data points to her questions, and powerfully let silence really force her to say, yeah, what do I want to get out of this, and come up with a very, I think, authentic and genuine response, and then position the 360 as, oh, there may be answers for your question here. Shall we take a look? That was just brilliantly done.
Yeah. Especially for a D that's a result oriented, asking them what result you want to get out of it is a great way of just building to their style, you know.
And he verbalized that even. He connected the dots. Here's already another data point that fits, you know, really well as a shoe, so to speak. You are a D, you want the results, and setting it up that way was just fabulously well done.
Yeah. Mikhail?
Yeah, I think the conversation, and I got to be Alice, the conversation, it would have been helpful. This demonstrated the helpfulness of having maybe a personal line of sight already there and having that relationship. Because the way I was acting, I felt unsafe, right? I felt threatened in some ways, especially as a woman in a leadership role, and falling into this trap of perpetuating a culture that goes against my values and my legacy and what I want to leave for the organization, et cetera. So I think that is where, hopefully that would have come out in some of my conversations before. But even if it didn't, I'm sure there, would have been easier for Raquel to draw on like other things that I would like to do, how I want to be seen, and get quicker to this and piece rather than the or that I was proposing. So I can be this or that, but so that was, I think that demonstrated the helpfulness of having that prior relationship and the personal line of sight.
And I think I would emphasize this always is I always put 360 as it's an in-between situations. And where reminding the leader what results or what legacy or where they're going after, what's their vision, and then where's their assess the team. I'm already have an insight of what the team is feeling. I just want to confirm that they see it or not. So what's their perception of the team? And then introduce the 360 to confirm or to show that there's going to be a breakdown of attaining that. And I think Danny was trying to get there with Chris or Alice by saying, trust is important to you, but what would happen if there's no trust? Because the data was saying, hey, we don't trust this person. We feel that they're only just catering to the board and not to us. And so by showing the breakdown to what their ambition is or what their personal vision is always a powerful way of connecting to, this is not about the data, this is about your story. And how does this confirm a threat to your story or an accelerator to the story? But it's connecting with that. And so here you're realizing that having done trust building and personal line of sight makes 360 much easier conversation than just having the data with no context to it, which many times does happen. You're brought in as a coach after a 360 is done and say, no, here's the 360, go debrief it and then go coach this person. It's like, it's very hard to come in at the data sets, not at the context and the story. Does that make sense? Oh, okay. Elizabeth.
Yeah, Mo, when you drew the picture, it made me think back to before break, you were describing how it's a team effort once the feedback is given. But I'm curious for those of you who've been coaching for a while, as many of the 360s as I've either had myself or contributed to for others, I don't think the person doing the interview or the coach for the individual or for myself has ever talked to the rest of the group about how they're a part of that plan and line of sight. Is that something that any of you all are incorporating at the time you're asking more specifically for that or for a commitment to that?
I'm not sure clear about your questions. Ask it again.
Okay. When I'm just going to use it as if when I have been a participant in someone else's 360,
yep,
I'm asked to do the feedback before and later. But earlier, before the break, Mo, you had said once the feedback is there, it's a group effort to get to whatever that line of sight is. How do you convey, or do you convey that to the participants? Because I've never had anyone convey that to me, that, hey, now it's part of your your commitment you're making by doing this, that you're going to help this person continue to work on this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it's all in how you, the coach, is introducing the 360 and what kind of culture are we trying to create within this, right? If there is a culture of coaching, this would be easier. If there's a culture of coaching that says like, okay, well, this is a tool, we're going to identify some area of that we can work on, and we all going to coach each other and help each other out. There's already a predetermined social contract that says it's data within a coaching culture. If you don't, that what makes it easier. But if it's not, then it's an opportunity for the coachee to go engage the people around them by being vulnerable of saying, here's what the data said collectively. These are the things that I am going to work on. Here's what I need your help on. For instance, I need to be better listener and get people input. So in the conversation, in the meeting, it should be, I'm being the vulnerable person, be saying, I'm not, and you told me that, and I need your help. And so please be my eyes and ears of that. If I'm not showing that I am listening, and I'm gonna, let's say the coach told them to practice looping by repeating back to people what they heard. And if you're not seeing that, please tell me. That's a group now engagement into trying to help this person. That's truly a stakeholder coaching, is everybody is now involved in that. But that takes a lot of trust building and the right culture and the willingness to be vulnerable and being able to accept feedback. And that would be the ultimate aspect of you, the coach, being able to create that for the people. And going back to, especially at the executive level, at 90% of the time is going to end up on the team coaching, just because they becomes the eyes and ears and connecting with that.
Thanks.
Other thoughts, or I think that's just some comment.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for the question. It caught me off guard, and I realized I always thought the way we help our client write the invite letter, basically, that transports the link and saying this is a learning opportunity and I need your help, is kind of my only opportunity to reach the team. And your question and now listening to Mo makes me realize there's so many more opportunities to make that more explicit, to not rely just on the language that comes in this invite letter. I'd never taken the perspective of the respondents as much upfront. I have with clients talked about, so how do you now close the loop with your team on this? But your question really, I think, opens up awareness around that there are other spots in the coaching relationship where that can happen. So thank you for that question.
And here's a letter that I'm using with permission from someone I worked with, where he puts it out there and says, here's what I heard, here's the positive things, here's the opportunity. I need to work on my pace, active listening, value adding, psychological safety, decision-making process. Here's what I'm committing to do, and here's what I need your help, right? And we put it out there for people to see. And basically asking for the help, because I can't be the loop closer for, I only interact with my coachee once every 2 weeks, but this person interact with their team on a daily basis. And so I need to get the team to be the eyes and ears and put it out there. It takes a lot of vulnerability to be willing to want to put that out. But that's where you take a good team to a high-performing team, where you're able to move into a culture of coaching and peer-to-peer help and helping each other, right? To be able to put it out there and kind of and drive it, to be able to do that. I usually use, especially if I am dealing with difficult issues. When I'm dealing with difficult issues, as an executive with some difficult issues, I always ask them to say, pick one or two people that are going to be your wingman or wingwoman, that are going to be your eyes and ears. And let's work with them, right? Sometimes they've picked their spouse, sometimes they pick their, and that's fine. It's just that I cannot be there all the time. I need other people. And that's what would help me see if there's calibrating or not calibrating. Are they improving or not improving? Because if I do a 360 before and 360 after, it's delayed, and I need behavior of connecting with that. There's another practice that also could be used, is what we call the daily questions. And the daily question is, if you're working on something, then you ask people that you trust, that specific question is, I'm working on this. Have I showed up that way? Like, I'm working on improving that. Have I showed up that way? And you ask it on a daily basis until they tell you, yes, you have. And then you move to the next thing. That's where you're leveraging other people to help you be the eyes and ears. Okay. All right. So let's close the engagement with the remainder time. So we talked about the results, and then also putting it out there, and committing to the improvement. And then now, after lots of work with your coachee, then how do we close the engagement or transition it to something else? Here's also a 360 post. So if you decide to do a post 360, this is how it would look like before and after, and you're showing improvement in every competency that you were working through their development. You're showing before and after. We even run t-test. This is if I have pricing connected to, if my compensation is connected to something, I got to have some more validation, and running a t-test on a data set before and after is a way to validate. It says it's been statistically proven that this person have improved, right? That's when you'd go the extra step of kind of work with that. But when you're closing an engagement with a client, being able to kind of go through and, close the engagement. Another aspect is to take kind of the original set goals, look at the area of focus, summary of the work that's been done, even confirm with the stakeholders and say, okay, you asked me to work with this person. Have you seen improvement? Here's what I saw. What have you seen? So validating that. Because if also I'm being paid by somebody else, I want to make sure that the other stakeholders is really seeing that they got their money worth, right? So closing the loop with the buyer is important. Any further recommendation for developments, or asking that person, that stakeholder on that, and then opportunity for extension. So when you're talking to the person that hired you, even though they may not be your coachee, is also to see if there's a need for that. This is where, again, it's important to kind of balance between the ethics of, do you feel that this person is in a good place that it's the right time to terminate the engagement? Or do you feel that this person is not hardwired the behavior and they could really benefit from an extension, and then you're being able to advocate for an extension? And this is where I would want to ask also all the other coaches is, I see a lot of people struggle with that because they, in one sense, they want to feel like you hired me to do a job, I did the job, success, versus saying, yes, I did the job, but it needs more work. Some people don't want to say that because they feel like a reflection, I didn't do a good job and I'm asking for more time. Love to kind of get thoughts from all the master coaches on how do you balance that aspect of, is this the right time to ask for an extension or not? How do you position that with stakeholders?
I position it up front. I don't set the expectation that, we've got, this is necessarily the end of the engagement. I emphasize that an extension may be recommended, or I may recommend that the client, try it on their own for a while and then we circle back or something like that. So there's a number of options, but I never let it feel like, this is going to be the end of it. With the behavioral coaching aspect, for example, one of the things that created years ago with a partner was to counter the Pulse program was, we called it DFib, Developing Emotionally Intelligent Physician Behavior, because DFib was the opposite of Pulse. So it was the idea that the behavior is a chronic condition, not an acute condition. And certain programs treated coaching like an acute solution to an acute condition. So what we did was we created the expectation that there would be less coaching. However, there would be some ongoing, even to the point where we would do like just a quarterly check-in, after we did, 10, 12 coaching sessions or whatever. But we reduced the frequency, but made sure that they knew that if you're going to buy this package to go on this journey, that there's going to be some time afterwards, because the sustainability factor is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I tell it to clients, is I use the term sustainability. And I say, if you just want them coached, then you get this. If you really want the sustainability, like the ones that say that, hey, can you just coach them, 3-4 times and, and fix things.
Yeah. Fix things. Right. Like
Right.
Chuck, you get two take.
You want it fixed or you want it sustainable?
Right.
You want to set the person up for success. Then now we're talking about, longer term. So I don't know, other coaches.
Yeah, I do the same. Dan, is I set it up in the contract initially, and how, they might buy, 12, 15 sessions or whatever, and knowing that they can use some of that time for team time as well, and we can allocate at the end. But I do generally run on something like this, a front loading where we'll meet more frequently and then put into practice. And so we'll slow the coaching down and enable them to change behavior. And then we check in at a later stage. So it might start with an initial, every 2 weeks we're meeting just to get things going and moving in the right direction. And then we'll look at the other pieces as they slow down. And then, if we find we're at a place, after 6 sessions or 3 sessions where we can start working with the team and building it into that, they generally push back and say, oh, I don't need to involve my team in this. But, generally after 3 sessions, they're like, yeah, we should involve the team in this, because I'll generally ask them, what is your team noticing? What behaviors has your team noticed you changed? Oh, I haven't asked the question. Okay, well, next session, I'd love for you to come back with some feedback of what people are noticing about it, and are they noticing the changes in you? So it just keeps opening up that crack of you gotta talk to me.
Yep. the
Same here with front loading and then increasing timeframes and having that driven often by the client. Actually, you notice that in the sessions when you're still at that high frequency, but there's just not the same kind of intensity in the work, it's typically a good sign to space it out a little bit more.
Mhm. Yep. And that's so it goes back to that closing the engagement is all connected to how you set it up to start with, right? Setting the right expectations, scoping what are you going to work on is critical. Like the 360, you can see there's tons of stuff to be worked on with Alice. That's not a 6 months engagement, right? If we're going to work on all those things. And so clearly it's like, okay, what is it that the 1 or 2 or 3 things we're going to work on, and then work on that. And then if you build good relationship and good trust, typically the client will say, this has been so beneficial that I really want to continue. Or sometimes the budget comes into play or other aspect of things. But so I always come into any relationship is that it does have an end, right? I always come into it that there does have an end. And then my commitment is I'm going to get you to that end with whatever we're going to work on. If at the end we feel we want to continue, that's great, but that's not my intention, is to keep it an open, infinite engagement, right? That puts people at ease of what am I signing up to, how long this is going to take, how much is going to cost, and all of those aspects. I say it's a 6 months. Okay, it's going to be a 6 months. Does it always ends up as 6 months? No, it's a lot of time. It ends up being extended and so on. But I'm okay with if I feel like I added value to my client within that 6 months, right? And so, like people say, plan for the worst, but hope. What is it? Hope for the best, plan for the worst, kind of things. Like hope that you get major improvement in the 6 months, and if there's more work to be done, great. And if not, you feel that you can close it and kind of feel good that you added value, right? So now I want to ask, what are some good practices and best practices for how do you close an engagement? How do you take your client through a review and a acceptance of this is a good time to close the engagement? Thoughts, ideas, and I can show some examples, but I would love to have it as a dialogue. What are some good practices of how you close, you get the client to feel that this is a good time to to close that? Elizabeth.
I've closed out, I guess, 3 of my clients now. And what I found helpful and they said was helpful was really the session before, we spent some time planning for that last session to make sure that it was really catered to what they wanted to do. And so we reviewed a lot of, we went through their project, we went through the things that they had set out to do to kind of see where they felt they landed, and then talked a little bit more about just after the engagement was over, those areas they still wanted to continue to grow and develop, what their plan for that would be. And so, and we celebrated the things that they accomplished. And so, that was just how I approached that last session. But they liked that we planned it the session prior, and they even knew some of the questions I was going to ask. They felt more prepared to be able to speak to things that way. So,
Yep, exactly. Hint, hint. The final paper that you're writing is exactly that. All right. the final paper you're writing is exactly that. It's you reflecting on, I went through a journey. What did I learn? How did I put it into practice? How did it show up, right? It's all about the reflection. Same thing with your client is how do you take your client through your reflection? I like how you did it, Elizabeth, is that it's session before the end session. Prepare them with the question and then say, okay, well, let's kind of talk about that. And what is it that you want to continue to work on? I think not waiting for the last session is a great way because then it enables more conversation and preparation. Awesome. What else best practices or things that worked with you? Chris, you did a lot of coaching. What have worked for you for closing an engagement?
The one thing I'm trying with one of my clients, I'm just wrapping up, is we're having a face-to-face meeting just to at his office, just to make that connection and sort of summarize what we learned and so on, just to summarize the whole journey, how it felt, and so on. That's something I haven't done because we live in such a virtual world that I had to do that. But I'm going to try that with this particular client, and he agreed to it, thought it would be fun. So,
right, and a celebration.
yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Wes, Dan, Dorothy, anything?
I can speak to that, Mo.
Sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. I like to prompt that conversation, that pre-closing conversation, about 75% of the way through, if it's a shorter engagement, maybe even 2/3 of the way through, because I want them to have plenty of time to think about it. And I find that sometimes that's more motivating for them to get more earnest and, kind of push toward the goal a little bit better. That's just been my experience.
Yeah. Checking in, seeing where we're at, going back to the original goals.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
I've got a number of clients right now with whom there is no predetermined number of sessions necessarily. So with them, I go almost in each session back to the starting point to say, here's where we started, here's where we have gotten, for next session, what piece do we want to bite off
Yep.
as the next step? And then again, in the conversation, when you start to have these, oh, I don't really have anything, or kind of the intensity changes dramatically, then I ask them, are we at a good spot in terms of where we started for you to say, I don't need to continue at this point. I want to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Being able to always kind of link it back to, here's the journey, here's where we're making progress. Do you feel you're making progress?
Yeah.
Right. If not, should we spend more time on this? I think that it is important, and it depends also on your style of whether you keep track of notes or not and the progress around that. I think those are great way also to kind of go back to it and debrief. So then looks like you were.
Yeah, some of the engagements, you'd set that up more formally up front. For the more formal engagements, I'll typically include something like what have you stopped doing as a result of the feedback and the work that we've done together? That's where our 360 may be involved. Or what did you start doing? And let's celebrate the things that you were doing well that you're going to continue to do. That that's that leveraging strengths conversation. Celebrations already come up. That's in the most informal sense. It's what are we celebrating, and what's your commitment to continuing in the future?
Yeah. Whether with me or without me.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And And so, and early on in the engagement, this comes up and people will ask you, well, how long do I, if it's not a prescribed program, it's like, well, how long do I need to keep doing this? Well, what I commit to is I said each session, at the end of the session, I'm going to ask you what was most valuable about the work we did today.
Right.
I'm going to make sure that we're constantly checking in. And I say, when you get to the point where you or I or both of us feel like we've reached a plateau, let's examine it and determine whether or not we can get off that plateau and continue to move forward with progress, or if this is a good time, to tie a nice bow on it, celebrate what we've learned, and end the coaching engagement. I just make sure that there's clarity around that up front, so that people don't spend every session wondering, how long am I going to have to do this, or, et cetera. Because you're going to get clients who they want you to be their coach for life. I had a surgeon tell me that the other day.
I have many of those, and I can say
yeah, you do.
I always remind them, I was like, I must be a terrible coach. It just can't get you graduated.
Right.
But it's, as long as they see the value, I think that's the key. But the other element I just want to point out, and then Galen, I know you've been patient on this. The one thing I also find very helpful, similar to what Dan was talking about, is that I have some of my client journal. So they have a journal at the end of every session. They journal, right? Like you did in this course. And that, because then that journal becomes the review and a reflection of, at the end of the, let's go through your journal. And let's kind of go through the journey that we went together, and let's really talk about, and so let them then becomes their trigger to start realizing that, yeah, I did make progress over time, and connecting it with that. I'm going to show you also with some client where I actually journal for them in a sense, and then, then we can put that back, and then they can see that aspects, especially at the executive level. Galen, you had a question, and then Chris.
I'm not in that much of a hurry. You all are saying good things, Mo. I think I learned, I feel like I have reflected a lot, that I've learned a ton on how I would open the engagement differently in the future. We're going to work towards some goals. But still, my clients are stuck in firefighting, regardless of what division in healthcare they lead. And so I find the question of have we met your goals means they had to have some clarity on that. So it's helpful for Dan to say, examine the plateau, or, what did you get out of it today? But I think part of what we're offering is the space to figure out where they, I want to be a better leader, or I want to not feel like I'm surviving all the time. So I don't know if other people have success in one of those opening sessions and, listing out 10 goals, and have we made progress on these, in terms of how do we know when we've gotten somewhere? So I'd love some insights on that. I would handle it better than I did back in March, April, but I still think firefighting mode leaves you in like, I'm just trying to get through the day. What are you talking about? Personal development goals? I think we still need that wider vision, and that's part of what coaching offers, but I'm having trouble framing it my clients are not coming up with lists of 10 goals.
Well, that's the thing. It's never a direct line of anything. Coaching is never a direct line. And people to have clarity at the beginning of what they want to work on is, I think, is an ideal, but it's not necessary that's what happened, especially in healthcare, with also firefighter and everything. But over the journey, you are working on small goals with the client, right? And those small success point of, I'm less reactive than proactive. Okay, great. That was a goal. Then we accomplished that. And then the next thing is, well, I am like not reacting to everything. Okay, great. And then now and then all of a sudden, if we are now an observer of this whole thing, these would have been the goals that have been at the beginning of a program, but we only discover them along the way, right? But
Okay.
but you bringing it to life is really the value, right? It's
That's
all incremental, but then at the end, the reflection is such an important element that brings it to life instead of, oh, we had some nice 10 calls, right? Like, no, we did something and we learned something. I mean, I'm just going to show you some of my practices just to tell you that it doesn't have to be complicated or things. Now, you guys know that I love whiteboard, as you can see. So you can tell that I use that in all my coaching. So this is an actual client and we were just kind of reflecting. So I take snapshots of the coaching if conversation and I send it to them afterward, every call. And so I have already a documented micro steps of working through that, right? So in this case, and again, I have permission to share this, we're working on picking your battle, none be perfect, be 80-20, and then be careful about stating intent versus impact, right? This was a conversation. Now, this is at the reflection of the engagement. I was asking, how do you feel now of this, right? Have you improved on this? Have you feel you kind of work through that? So it's you know, it's a great way of, maybe now AI could do all of this for me, but I'm just bringing back to life how we progressed through this. Okay. And it's a picture, right? I bring the disc back and so, okay, because we talk about the disc, let's talk about that. What shows up for you? How are you working at it? How is that stressful? Are you seeing the stress? Are you seeing the enjoyment? Are you putting that into practice? And so we revisit that. We did a 360 and like, okay, where are you with the 360? And have we improved on these things that we said we were going to be able to do? And then, right, this is now a debriefing session around it. Then here's the commitment we worked on. I usually send them this card of all the key learnings that we talked about. So 10 lessons. And so now that becomes kind of the roadmap. Okay, we talked about these things. How are you doing that? Are you managing your air times? And I even go a little bit further and we do a rating before and after. So we're going to work on listening. Where do you think you were before the engagement? Where do you think you are now? And then if I have time, I'll make them say, well, what's the evidence about it? All right. And how are you going to sustain it? So kind of can I connect with that? But those are specific things. If I have a 360 before and after, then I will use that data for it. And a lot of my coaching, I talk about identity. And so we talk about, well, what is your identity before? And what do you think your identity is now? And we go through that activity and conversation. And this person was burned out, criticized everyone, to now they're expressing gratitude for others. Like, oh my God, that's great. You know, and so that's the opportunity to be able to drive that. And then what's your commitment moving forward? You know, and then do we need to ask for an extension if you want to continue to work together? So I put that because that's kind of an example of an end. It's really before the end. It's not the last session. It's run before it. Here's the things. And it doesn't take me long to put it together because I'm already taking notes throughout the engagement. So it's just pulling, we had the 360, we had this. Now let's reflect on that. Chris.
These are all great ideas. I love this, Mo. Your comment on AI is a great transition because I've been experimenting with AI during all my engagements throughout the last 6 or 8 months. And I've been having the ChatGPT analyze my coaching engagements and like identify key themes and challenges that were discussed, what the solutions were. And I've even been having it evaluate my coaching relative to the ICF coaching competency. So I upload all this stuff into the system and it basically tells me how I'm doing. And I had one client, or actually all three of them have expressed interest in seeing some of this. So I stripped out the coaching evaluation part and just sent them, here are some of the key conversations we had, some of the key challenges that you brought up, and how we collaborated together and what we ended up with in terms of key insights and actions. And it's pretty amazing what it can do.
What are you using for? Are you is AI running in the background for recording, or?
I'm not there yet, but that's where I'm headed. So we've been using Teams to record, Microsoft Teams, and I upload the audio to like a Otter AI or something like that to transcribe it, and I just been using OpenAI's ChatGPT. I have a premium version, and I just upload the transcript, and it's all in the prompting. A lot of work into prompting. Because if you ask really, you're very specific in what you're asking for, it'll do a pretty good job.
Yeah. Yep. I think AI is the next aspect of this to help be an extension. But short of that, I think just letting the client reflect on their learning and their journey is as important as the coaching itself. This is where learning occurs, is by them realizing whether they learned, applied, changed behavior, and even better, if we can get evidence from other people to confirm that things have happened, right? And that's why post 360 are also powerful, is because then you validate that. I tend to go back to key stakeholders and just make sure that they validate, right? Especially if they're paying the bill. Like, you asked me to work with this person, I'm closing the loop with you. We worked on these 3 things. What are you seeing? All right, great. Yeah, I see a lot of progress. Thank you for that. It's amazing. Or no, we haven't seen progress. And, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, then maybe this is the time to do some more extension, or, right? But always having the stakeholders' involvement in this is critical. And then having the reflection.
Great job, Chris, in learning more about your own coaching and what you can do differently through the use of the AI tool. I think that's the number one reason that you would want to use it, is to improve your own coaching. It gives you such valuable feedback. But I just wanted to double click in on that when you've established that they have something to go away from your sessions and to support themselves, what their accountability is, and all the tools that you've been using from your client's perspective. But also, I want them to reach out to me, not when they're in crisis again. I want them to reach out and let me know how they're celebrating each time and what's kind of going on for them. And so I don't want to be just known as the problem coach. You call me when you screwed up. So that I want you to phone me and let me know, hey, that journey was, here we are. And that's what I think that Mo is also talking about, sort of the clients for lifetime. Any of my clients, kind of very similar situation, they know they can reach me out, and reach out to me at any time and get a conversation going. So that's about the relationship. It can be as hard for you as a coach letting go and letting your client fly, because you're going to miss it more than they do, because they've already got their life filled up. So some of this knowledge that you're gaining through your client is going to help top your bucket, so that you don't feel the void of when your client goes, because you want them to fly, you want them to go. Now you have room for that, but know that there is this separation anxiety sometimes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the ultimate thing is when your clients then become coaches themselves, and then they're coaching others and they're paying it forward. And, then you feel like, that's also a way of paying it forward is to see them now helping other people. So a couple more things, planning the transition. It's to kind of making sure that they're committing to continue to improve and developing, whatever they're committing to. Again, I use that as, well, what are you going to do moving forward, and how are you going to commit for doing that, and who's going to be your accountability partner, because I'm not going to be that person. Following up with the stakeholders, we talked about that. Then also use that as a learning opportunity for yourself as a coach, of ask for feedback. Like, how did I do? And ask them for their opinion, and whether it is a formal survey or informal survey. All of those things are also the return of your investment, is to see, is there something that you could have done differently? Or is there something that is a testimonial? Because if someone says, "Oh, this was great," and it's like, "Okay, great. Can you give me that? Here's that as an example. This example of the person I told you about. Here's her testimonial. I asked, hey, what would, if somebody calls you today, what would you say? And I'm like, well, Mo's approach to personalizing the physician leadership coaching, he gave me the ability to recognize that how I can improve, but also had a good return, positive, fun approach. How do you recommend? So great. So now I have one more testimonial, right? But also a confirmation, like, yeah, I've done a good job. You take care of that. When you're going to be eventually on your own, and you have to build your marketing, and your equity is the feedback of your client, right? That's all we have. We can't share who they are. We can't share what we worked on with them, but their testimony at the end is, you have to ask for it, right? That's your return on your investment. So I put that in there because that's critical element of closing an engagement, is at least walk away with some kind of feedback and testimonial. Does that make sense? And then celebrate success. We talked about that. Ensure accountability by others. Provide resources for continued growth. Add them to your blog, add them to your newsletter, provide them with books and articles and so on. I think all your coachee ought to be your connections for future, because you never know when they're going to need more help, so that there'll be a reoccurring business, or they refer you to others and kind of, drive it from that perspective. Okay. And then I said, extend the engagement if that is the case. Ethical balance between closure and extension. I think it's important to kind of remind ourselves is that there is an ethical balance. Is this the right thing to do, is to extend, or is this just, are we extended it because it's a good revenue? And I've seen some people just, not do some ethical stuff for that. Then I included yours, what you talked about, stop, keep, get started, and kind of as a formal commitment and closing. And then what are some of the way of closing it formally? Again, kind of work through that. So that's, I think, most of the stuff that we wanted to cover today. I know we covered a lot, from the 360 to the closure. And so let's do some reflection. Elizabeth, the answer to your question, yes, you'll get your feedback from those people. Once we have them all, we'll send it back to you through your coach. So let's do some reflections. Lessons learned from today. Takeaways. We covered a lot. 360.
It felt really helpful to dialogue a lot, and so I feel like there was more learning from each other and all of you experts, and it feels really helpful as we're nearing that. I was totally unsure later this week how I was going to start going towards the finish line, and some of these are closing the engagement. I still feel confused, and maybe this is just the nature of it, on what 360 to use. I think yours is the HLI one that sounds amazing, but that's probably through HLI courses. We've used a Hogan, and every reaction I get to that is it takes forever, and nobody really wants to spend an hour answering questions, but it's good feedback anyway. So I feel like,
360,
okay,
yeah.
this would be good, but so the closing the engagement, I wrote pages of notes here, and I feel like that's super helpful. And I still, and the 360 seems so valuable. Like, how do you really assess a leader if we're just talking about like, oh, I'm really good. Yeah, I got it all figured out. But the 360 gives you so much. And I loved the questions like, are you dynamic? Are you positive? Are you self-care? I mean, I work with a leader who, oh my goodness, she emails me at 4 a.m. and by 6, she's ready to text me. And I'm like, back off, you know? So I think I don't know how to practically implement that, which is part of what keeps coming up in this course. But overall, really good dialogue in this session, and I'm very appreciative for that.
Right. Hey, Galen, the 360 is a tool that you could use. So you can run it for any client you need. So all the tools that we covered with you in this course are available to you as a coach.
And there are somewhere that we can find them. That's
yeah, the 360, they need to be set up. There's a setup where, so we can show you offline of
okay.
how, but it's a service that, like any other service, like the disk, like 360 is an automated process. You have to ask people for the name, and then we load it up. But you can run it for one person, you can run it for a whole organization. So know that for all of you, if you want to use a 360 from HLI, it's available to you. It's not, doesn't have to be connected to anything else. It's a coaching tool. If you want to run the disk, if you want to run any of the assessments we covered are all available to you to run them as part of your portfolio. Yep. Michaela, is there an opportunity for a playbook with all the available resources through HLI? Yes. I think one of the things we want to explore with you as part of the alumni is how do we keep this going, and so that we can also have a support network for you so that there's a community. So that's one question, even in the final papers, how can we create this ongoing alumni, and how often would we get together? So we'll have more discussion with you as how do you connect with that. And that's why ultimately, actually, let me put this one slide on, because I said I was going to share it with you. It's going to be your homework for next session. I put that on. Okay, we'll be emailing this to you in a Word document so you can work on it, but it's your coach profile. Okay, it's your background, your coaching philosophy, what's unique about your coaching, what's coaching specialization do you want to be in? Like, are you going to be a group coach, a women leadership coach, a team coach, a physician coach? What specialty do you want to be in? Or are you going to be just a general healthcare coach? Training certifications, any example or case studies or things that you would want to list through that. But that's kind of a profile we're trying to create on all of you, so that, for one thing, is if you're going to have a coaching practice, you need this. It's your one pager. That's your marketing. And so the next session, it's all about how you market yourself and how do you build your business But if you want to also work with HLI, we will need this, and we're happy to work with you offline so that you can also see examples, but also how we help you kind of think through that. And your coach will also be able to help you think through kind of what's unique if you need to kind of niche through that. Okay. But you're gonna be on your own, and we support you.
One way that I, with my trauma coaches, one way that I keep the alumni fresh in its way is also that the alumni becomes available to get pro bono coaching from the new people that are coming through. Now, it's called pro bono, but it's actually recorded as paid coaching because they're a part of a program. And you've been a part of a program. So it's actually can be included as paid hours. And that is that if, we had somebody from the new alumni coming in and they're looking for a coach, they could actually coach, you for 10 hours, you could do for 3 hours or 5 hours or whatever we decide on. And what that does is it provides kind of a gap fill as well. Gives you coaching hours, gives you the ability to do recordings for mentoring and stuff like that. But it also gives you opportunity to practice and to have hours. And I'm not sure whether that's going to be something that's required from your grouping, Mo, but it is a thought that we could somehow use the alumni in supporting new coaches as they come through.
Yeah, there's a lot of possibility. I think we've been focusing on kind of getting this first cohort kind of through, and then now we can, so any ideas that you have, we have tons of opportunity. I'll share with you one more opportunity where you can be involved is we're going to be coaching young healthcare executives globally, from Africa, from Asia, and these people cannot afford coaching at any dollar level, but they're running hospitals and clinics and so we volunteer to start doing some group coaching for those young executives. So any of you want to coach the next generation, but also learn about global challenges in healthcare, because that's the reason I'm doing it, is because it's like such a great gift of learning how people work within constraints that it is not even imaginable for us, like in Africa and other areas, is an amazing opportunity. So we're going to try to put some opportunity for us to continue to be together. But also, if you remember at the beginning, I told you there's another initiative which is called the 100 healthcare coaches, which is going to be kind of the best healthcare coaches out there, and then we're going to build that truly out there so people will consider that to be the premier best healthcare coaches. And so we'll continue to kind of also update you on that and invite you to be part of that. So okay, any more final thoughts or reflections before we close? Was this a helpful conversation today? Yep. Excellent.
Is there anything we need to touch base about in terms of preparation for January? I know Rihanna sent us a great information by email, but is there anything else we need to confirm?
Finish your requirement. Don't get a certificate of completion. Make sure you get a true certification. So finish all your requirement before.
And still, I have our group, our circle practice meeting on Thursday. So for any of you, you would have seen your reminder come through. And I still have 2 sessions here that are called makeup sessions. If you want a copy and attending the makeup sessions, we just have good conversation, if anything, right? So send me an email.
Yep. And final paper, December 20th. Just keep that in mind. All right. It's not a test, it's just a paper.
And maybe those who are arriving early in Boise, let us know, us locals know, or then maybe we can, grab a coffee or something prior to the dinner, or depending on if everybody's getting in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michaela. I was looking at flights yesterday and getting from Wenatchee, which is in the middle of nowhere. I challenge you all to find it on a map before I meet you all in January. But I might end up coming for 2 nights because otherwise I would get
Well, let
on
us
a
know.
5 a.m. flight and return on a midnight, which makes working really hard. So I might come for 2 nights. So
yeah.
You're on, Galen. I'll take that bet on the map.
okay. It's in the middle of nowhere.
I've been there a lot.
Okay, you live in Seattle, so that's fair. Yes. Oh, picked apples, Josh. Strong work. Yes. Yeah. So let's make more of a weekend of it for anybody who's around. Thank you.
Awesome. Everyone, thank you for making this a great, great dialogue, and continue being part of this. I'm excited about next sessions and graduations, and look for a follow-up email with that coach profile, and then we'll help you kind of think through that. Okay. All right. Until then.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you,
you all.
everyone.